Hi, and welcome back to the fourth episode of J&J. Me and Jack today will be talking about a variety of international topics, including Ukraine and Russia, North Korea and Japan, and the recent OPEC cut. Jack, do you want to get us started? I know you wanted to talk a lot about Ukraine and Russia today.
Yes, we can get started. I want to go back to September 30th, when Putin talked endlessly about annexing 4 regions in eastern Ukraine that accounts for about 15% of the total population. That is now Russia, according to Russia. Nobody else buys that, though. The reason they did this is twofold. One is Russia wants to do this. Putin wants to, expand his empire, gain more land. That's really one of the main reasons he invaded Ukraine. And it's also a way to say, hey, eastern Ukraine is now part of Russia. If you attack it, our nuclear doctrine says we can protect Russia with nuclear weapons. Yeah. Right? So it is, quote unquote, legally permissible in Russian law for them to do this. This adds to their nuclear saber rattling, which has been increasing over the past couple of months by Putin as he keeps getting defeated over and over again, I might add. During his speech, he also talked about how the West is a colonizing power who has thrown India, China, Latin America, and the Middle East under the bus. I thought it was interesting that he called all of these countries out, as there are countries that have either sketchy relationships with the West or are under the Western mechanism, but might want it to be changed. Yeah. And he ended his speech by announcing the mobilization or partial mobilization, he likes to call it, of somewhere between, we're not totally sure, if I'm being honest, 200,000 to 1 million Russian troops. Yeah,
I saw that. It was, I think it was reported at 300,000, but people are suspecting that it was 1 million. Yeah, it is 1 million or something like that.
There's some weird clause that it can be up to somewhere around 1.2 million.
They also have rules, like these fake rules where they're like, oh, we won't draft college students or whatever, but then they're already like bypassing those rules. So
yes, Putin went back on some of that. He added that rule recently because of the blowback of college students who are being, taken from the university, literally sitting in class and the next day in the front lines of Ukraine. And this is really what is happening. They're being sent with little to no training. They're sleeping on the ground in Ukraine. They don't have campsites. They don't have anything. Some of them aren't even given weapons, and the ones that are given 30-year-old AK-47s from that were used in Afghanistan decades ago. So the conditions are terrible. They're being used as cannon fodder. Also, they're being thrown. Ethnic minorities are being sent disproportionately compared to the average, Russian citizen. So this is seen as many as a 2 birds with 1 stone scenario. Putin can get rid of the ethnic minorities, which he wants to get rid of, and send more troops over to Ukraine, right?
Yeah, and also that's not surprising. That's like something we can kind of see historically. I mean, even America, when they had drafts, it disproportionately affected minorities, right? Because minority populations are usually lower income. They live in, they're kind of clustered into similar communities that don't have a lot of education, don't have a lot of income, and so then those kind of areas, aren't able to meet the kind of get outs that you get from, like, okay, you're in college, or you can like get a doctor to say that you're fine or whatever. So yeah, that's not surprising, really.
Yeah, and we can also see protesters, much like in February and early March, protests are happening in Russia. People don't like this mobilization. This is seen as, before it was, a partial military incursion is what it was called, right? People were like, yeah, we're at war with Ukraine, but not really, right? I can go and get my coffee and my life is still like it always is. And now people, even in some places like Moscow and St. Petersburg, these big cities, are being drafted, right? Their dads, their sons are being drafted to fight against Ukraine. So it's seen as a real war now, right, from Russia's perspective.
Yeah, that kind of, I want to kind of ask a question about that. You're talking about how they're kind of sending in cannon fodder. Mm-hmm. I'm curious, why do you think that Russia is kind of going about, as if like they're the Union in the Civil War, like they're just throwing people out there with very poor training, and there's videos that are coming out where they're like have these rusty AK-47s that look like that they barely operate. What's the tactic there? Is it kind of desperation? What do you think?
Yeah, one is, from what I've read, So it might not work as well as Putin wants it to work, but it is an effective strategy for exerting Ukraine's munitions, right? They have a minimum. They don't have infinite amounts of ammunition or of missiles or all of these weaponry, right? And if they see Russian army guys coming their way, they're going to shoot at them, and they might be, they might be carrying defective AK-47s. It doesn't matter. You're still going to shoot at them if you're Ukraine, right? And you're using your munitions and your missiles. So Russia is kind of, as horrible as it is, using these humans as literally cannon fodder, right? Just shoot at them, get rid of your munitions, and boom, then we can keep moving and just throwing waves after waves of people at you, basically. Again, it's important to note, Russians, many of them don't like this. Actually, within the last 2 weeks, about 1% of Russia's population has left Russia. They've gone to neighboring countries, Kazakhstan, or they're evacuating the country however they can. Today, 2 Russian dissidents were found in an obscure Alaskan island asking to be, kind of rescued by the United States. We can talk now militarily what's happening in Ukraine. I'm sure people have heard about this. A couple weeks back, it was called the Kharkiv Offensive. This is the second largest city in Ukraine in the northeast, where Ukraine mounted a counteroffensive against Russia. And this was a very big deal. One, because, again, it's a second largest city in Ukraine, and two, it's strategically important for holding the eastern part, which Russia just annexed.
Yeah.
And they're currently, as we speak, moving on a southern city called Kherson, which is also very, very important. And they're moving very, very fast. People continue being surprised by the speed and agility of the Ukrainian army. And they're also surprised, even Western analysts and, frankly, Ukrainian army themselves keep being surprised by how bad the Russian army is, their logistics, their all of these things, right? Russia started as this massive offensive. They were going to take Kyiv in 72 hours and take the whole country in a matter of weeks. Yeah. And it would just be easy, quick, and clean. And now they're not only defending the little territory they have, but they're losing the territory that they are trying to defend, right?
Yeah, it is surprising how terrible they are.
No one really saw that coming.
I don't know if you have insight into this, but I don't really know why. Like, I don't know why. I mean, obviously, you could say sanctions hit them hard, whatever. But regardless, even in those first 2 weeks, it just was poor. Like, the strategy was poor. They didn't employ things correctly, and now they've kind of ran out of steam, even though they didn't really get like as much as they nearly would have hoped. So I'm kind of curious why you think, they're so bad, really.
The biggest factor, I think, and this can be proven in many different ways, and we know this, Russia is very, very corrupt, right? The people at the top say, and the generals themselves, right? Even the defense minister of Russia, they say, yes, we have, it recently came out, they thought they had somewhere like 1.3 million army uniforms, and they don't even have a quarter of that, right? So the generals, they're given money to make these uniforms from Russian taxpayers and the government. And then they pocket 3/4 of it, and they make a quarter of what they're supposed to do, right? Yeah. So a big reason is embezzlement and corruption. There's a lot of reports right now of Ukrainian army says we don't even want the things that Russia's leaving behind when they evacuate, right? Their weaponry, their tanks, their Soviet era, they don't work, they don't move. They're missing pieces that have been sold for spare parts, right? So we can talk about why Ukraine does this. Why, one, they're liberating these big cities, obviously because they want to. It's their land. It's what they have to do. But also these are strategic because it garners support, right? Yeah. From the West. We're talking about it right now. The West is talking about it. Biden's talking about it. Macron is talking about it. They're all talking about it. And this garnering of support is really what keeps Ukraine going, right? Yeah. Them being able to point and say, look, we just liberated Kharkiv or Kherson or Izium or all of these cities. The West can be like, wow, the weapons we were giving you can not only use them effectively, but you were pushing Russia out of what you want.
That is a great point, actually. I didn't kind of think of that piece of insight because, if Ukraine kind of comes off as defeatist and you're like, okay, it's only a matter of weeks or months, then, it's kind of been seen as like, there's no point buying into that financially. But yeah, you're right. Like the best form of defense is attack, as they say. So, yeah.
And this is... So all of this puts in context also the fact that Western countries are delivering way not as much weaponry as they have said they delivered. France has only delivered 2% of what it has said since the beginning of the war. Poland 22%, Germany 9%, the U.S. 49%, which is even 49%, which is the highest. That is only half of what we've pledged, right?
It's still a lot, though.
It's
still
it's
huge,
definitely a lot. It's billions of dollars. It's very important. And France says that, right? So with their 2%, they say, well, yes, it's 2%, but we need you to know that 2% involves a quarter of our entire mobile artillery. It involves, hundreds of millions of euros of aid.
Yeah,
right?
and it's not surprising that they also have kind of made quote unquote empty promises, because that is politics, and that's also kind of deterrence as well. If they come in at the beginning and say, oh, we're going to give them this much, that can maybe they're attempting to make Russia feel a little bit scared or whatever, even if they know behind the scenes that they're not going to end up contributing that much.
Yeah, but I think this also shines a light on something that I definitely didn't know before the war, and I think most people didn't know as well. That European countries are not as militarily powerful as one would have thought. I still believed for some reason that they were, these great powers of World War II, and they don't. Their militaries are shambles, all of them.
Yeah.
So I was definitely surprised by that. To wrap this one up, the fear of nuclear weapons is also a real fear coming. Russia has continuously said this. The Biden administration has not done the best job at responding to this, I think. Kiev believes that the danger of Russia dropping a nuclear weapon, whether it be in Kiev or in Kherson or a recently liberated city, is very big. There are multiple members of parliament in Kiev who are certain it's going to happen, and they believe, in the next coming month or weeks, a nuclear weapon will be detonated in Ukraine. Kiev... The Kiev City Council recently approved a measure to distribute iodine pills to its citizens. So this is a real risk, right, that people need to take seriously. This also comes as Ukraine has asked for NATO membership officially. They've kind of asked before, but they've signed the paper. 9 countries have already signed yes. The remaining 21 are it's unlikely to happen, honestly. Most of this is kind of semantics. Even the U.S. might say yes, let's get them into NATO to show our support, but it's not actually going to happen.
Yeah.
It would be terrible, right? Article 5 would be invoked, and all these countries would fight Russia, and we don't want that. So it's unlikely to happen. And then also something that we've started seeing more and more of is thousands of Iranian drones that are really hurting Ukraine. These are drones that Russia got from Iran a couple months back and had trouble using them at first, but they're very, very effective. And we're starting to see how it's actually hurting Ukraine. So
what are the odds that you're giving? I've asked you this question before many times.
Yes.
What do you think is the chance of Putin using a nuclear weapon? Although people might think when they think of a nuclear weapon as like a huge massive bomb, but it could be smaller, right? But it's still a nuclear weapon. So what are the kind of odds that you're giving that?
I think it's important to identify something. I think the odds of him testing one along like Ukraine's border or in the Black Sea or something like that, it kind of as a show of force, are big, right?
100%, very likely.
It's likely. Him actually using a tactical nuke, which is a smaller nuclear device that can be more strategic, right?
Yeah.
Some people say using a nuclear weapon is not strategically beneficial. That's not true. It would be strategically beneficial in some cases in Ukraine. I think if Putin thinks it'll help him strategically and the blowback won't be, something short of the U.S. intervening directly or something like that, then he would use it. I still think the odds are low in the single, maybe 10% digits. Again, I don't know. I'm just pulling these numbers out of nowhere. But it is a real fear, right? This is as not to fearmonger, but this is as close as we are to a nuclear bomb being dropped since the Cuban Missile Crisis or the height of the Cold War. So it is a real fear to have.
Yeah, I agree. And I think I kind of wanted to actually add onto something you said earlier, but you were so excited to talk about nuclear deterrence. But yeah, you were talking about, European countries not being as militarily powerful as we might have thought, and it's true. But we're starting to see actually in a lot of different European countries an increase in military growth. So I think it's Germany in the past 5 years has really increased it. The new chancellor, right, because Merkel stepped down a while ago, and so the new chancellor, he's very interested in increasing the military budget. Italy as well, they have a new government, and I think their plan is to increase the military budget about like $7 billion or something, which is like over there. That's like a lot more, right? Because it compared to like, in the United States, $7 billion isn't a lot. But yeah, so they're in a lot of these European countries, we're starting to see, the amount of military expenditures increase. And that's not really a surprise, right? Because we're starting to see a bit of a red, or not red, I guess, over there, a right wing wave. And so that comes with, cuts to welfare spending and increases in defense spending typically. So yeah, and I also think it's really easy for them to kind of point to Russia because it's much closer to them than it is here, and say this is why we need to increase our military budget. So yeah, that's something that I think over time we'll see some European nations definitely bolster up their militaries.
Yeah,
but yeah,
they definitely will, and it makes sense, right? So before. Honestly, the reason NATO is strong is because the United States is there. It provides over 50% of NATO's military capability. And now it's a real fear of, right? Russia invaded Ukraine. This is something we invaded Ukraine again.
Yeah.
We didn't think it was going to be this full scale this time.
Yeah.
So it makes sense that countries are now worried and increasing their military budgets, right? Poland has done this. Germany has done this. Many countries have done this.
So yeah, and if you don't mind, I'll move on to the next topic.
Yes, let's move on.
In a kind of similar vibe, North Korea, if most people I'm sure know, fired a missile over Japan and into the sea on Tuesday, I believe, and that was for the first time in 5 years, I think. And so it was very provocative, right? They haven't done this in a while, and the military, the weapon, nuke, thinking about Russia, but the weapon that they fired over Japan is a lot more developed than it has been in previous years, right? They're kind of showing that they're becoming a lot stronger. They weren't able to specifically identify which ballistic missile it was, but they were kind of able to tell that it was similar to one of I think Japan or America's. So yeah, it's definitely interesting. The United States has come out and kind of blamed China and Russia for this, and I agree. I think I kind of understand. I think obviously they're going to point to China and point to Russia and say, look, you are encouraging people you're encouraging North Korea to be more provocative. And I think. But I also think it is also something that North Korea has done for since when was it, 2009? Forever, yeah. Yeah, well, especially in recent years, ever since they pulled out of they were part of a nuclear deterrence group where they were like, we're not going to make nukes or whatever, and then once they left that with Kim Jong-un, then they started pumping them over the seas. Kind of another thing is that you and I wanted to talk about was what's up with this? What's up with North Korea? We talked about this, I think, on episode 2. What's up with Iran? What's up with some of these countries who are so interested in developing their nuclear programs at the expense of a huge amount of sanctions? I was kind of curious what you think.
Yeah, there's actually a great paper written about this at thebriefco.com. It's a
wonderful author.
Incredible analysis.
Who was it? Which author was it?
Jack Masliah or someone incredible like that. But anyway, moving on. Just to add more context to what you said, I want to correct you a little bit. They do this all the time. This is the first time in 5 years that they do a missile that is this big and this powerful. It's actually it went further than any missile they've ever shot into the sky, right?
Yeah.
This also comes as North Korea flew something like 14 planes very, very close to the South Korean border. This doesn't happen often. South Korea responded with flying 30 planes close to the North Korean border, right? So tensions are escalating in the region. I think to your nuclear weapons question, it might not make sense to the country, right? Over half of North Korea is starving, but Kim Jong-un loves his power, and he's afraid. He is very, very afraid, much like Putin, that his power will be taken away by the United States and the West and South Korea and all of these, evil actors, right?
Yeah.
So it makes sense because nuclear weapons are the ultimate deterrence. We're not going to overthrow Kim Jong-un if he has nuclear weapons, obviously. To pursue it at full speed because now he is secure. He has the ultimate security that you can ask for.
That's true. Yeah, that's true.
So it might be horrible for his people, but he doesn't care about his people, just like
Yeah.
Putin doesn't care about his people. So yeah,
That's true, yeah.
that's why he wants nuclear weapons.
I
and
guess I am thinking of it too much of
too practically.
I'm thinking of it too much like of the success of his nation and less of that makes sense. And this also kind of this is a huge. But you did say they do this all the time, but it's again it's something that Kim Jong-un has been doing. So it's like it is very specific. Obviously, the North Korean regime has not been amicable towards any nations, but Kim Jong-un especially has been terrible. And he's released this. I think it was last year. He released this 5-year plan, this economic plan, where essentially he wants to have economic growth. He wants to increase iron and steel. He wants to push for better infrastructure, construction, commerce, whatever. But then, right, a big part of that plan is nukes. And I'm almost sitting there. I didn't read the actual plan itself, but I read like an outline of it, right? And it's kind of like, where do nukes come into this, right?
Yeah.
Because it's funny because a lot of these things that he's talking about, construction, commerce, whatever, would all actually jump like 15 times if he stopped making nukes. But I suppose
and the sanctions were eased,
Yes, I suppose that's just speeches, right? And it's the same thing as Putin going up there and
semantics,
saying things.
yeah,
It doesn't actually mean anything.
He just wants his nuclear weapons. And also, talk has been going on for weeks, if not months now, that North Korea is preparing for a nuclear missile test, which hasn't happened in some amount of years. I don't have the numbers, but it hasn't happened. So people should gear up for that. That will happen sooner rather than later.
So how do you think, China and China doing their stuff with Taiwan being aggressive and Russia doing the same with Ukraine, well, even to a bigger extent, right? How do you think that's kind of, pushing North Korea and saying, hey, look, you can do that? Or do you think it's kind of irrelevant and North Korea would do this regardless?
I think North Korea would do this again, he wants nukes to protect himself. He doesn't, I don't believe he wants a war with South Korea. He knows that means war with the U.S. and war with all these powers that can quash him. So it's really just he wants to be seen as this international player and this big man with nuclear weapons, right? That's really what he wants, and he's honestly getting that. China loves this, by the way. China's is North Korea's best partner. They give him.
It's like their only partner,
but like their only partner in Russia and and Iran. But China loves this because it keeps South Korea and Japan in check. And they poke North Korea and they're like, hey, do some missile tests to distract. You know what I mean?
Yep.
You can't. These things don't happen just by by coincidence in these places.
Yeah.
We can move on now to OPEC cutting oil production. Briefly, I can describe what it is. So it's an organization of 23 oil-producing countries.
That's OPEC plus.
OPEC
right?
plus, sorry. And their mission is to stabilize the oil markets and ensure, the security and efficiency of oil worldwide. If we put it bluntly, it's a monopoly or cartel that controls prices in the supply of oil, led by Saudi Arabia. And they recently decided to cut the production of oil. So this means that all these OPEC countries, OPEC plus countries, 23 of them, will cut the amount of oil being produced as to increase the price. This will be very good for Russia since they have a lot of oil sitting on them that they can sell and that countries want. And this will hurt the United States and the EU, especially the EU, as we face winter and they're facing severe energy shortages.
Yeah.
U.S. prices for oil, which have been already going up. They've gone up around 8% in the last week after they had been consecutively going down for a couple of months. These prices are expected to increase by somewhere from 10 to 20% in the coming month, right before the midterms, by the way. So we'll see what happens with that. So that's not very good for us and our allies.
Yeah.
The White House expressed disappointment. They said they said actually it was a pretty harshly worded statement. It was something along the lines of we need to reduce the control that OPEC plus has over energy prices.
Yeah, Biden was like slamming it as a short-sighted decision.
Right.
Yeah.
And that makes sense, right? It
Yep.
hurts us. It helps Russia, who's our enemy, right? All of these things.
The National Security Advisor actually he had this quote that it was I don't know if you heard about this, but he said, I'll just read it. He said, at a time when maintaining a global supply of energy is of paramount of importance, this decision will have the most negative impact on lower and middle income countries that are already reeling from elevated energy prices. And then I think he's like part of the Indian consulate or something like that. He in the United States, he disagreed. He came out and said, we disagree with that. He said we have a $2,000 per capita GDP, which is, compared to like the 68,000 for the U.S. And he said, we actually like this. India said that. And
surprising, yeah.
Yeah, I was surprised by that. Very surprised by that. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know why. I don't know if you know why he would say that and say, oh, I think that these cuts are good. I mean, maybe from a short-sighted point of view, it reduces the price of gas, right?
It increases the price of gas.
Oh, it increases. What does it do then?
Cutting the amount of gas that countries are allowed to put out there increases the cost per gallon of gas, right? Again, maybe this could be good for India because they're buying Russian gas at an extreme discount, right?
Yeah.
Because they're one of the only buyers because they're not giving to Russia isn't giving gas to Europe anymore. What's also interesting is the U.S. response from some of the senators and representatives. A couple of them introduced bills to remove all U.S. troops and missile defenses and aid to Saudi Arabia and the UAE. Keep in mind we have somewhere around from 4,000 to 5,000 troops stationed in both of these countries. This is a very, very big thing, right? The Saudi Arabia is a big ally in the Middle East. Well, that's the question that we're actually going to ask now. Is it a big ally in the Middle East? Senator Chris Murphy said there has to be a wholesale reevaluation of the U.S. alliance with Saudi Arabia, which is a big deal. Yeah. Saudi Arabia is important to countering Iran. It's important for oil and many other reasons. So you can expect this kind of talk to ratchet up in the next couple of days, weeks, and months, and years to come. How much do we actually want Saudi Arabia to be an ally?
Yeah, I think that's something I kind of want to talk about, right? Because the Saudi Arabia hasn't been a good ally, right? And the relationship between Saudi Arabia has become a little bit dependent. The U.S. has become a little bit dependent on them. They haven't kind of asserted their dominance. And that's kind of the position. I read an opinion piece and it said that we need to rebalance the relationship between Saudi Arabia and the U.S. because the U.S. isn't actually as dependent on Saudi Arabia as they used to be a decade ago. Yeah. They've cut a ton of imports from Saudi Arabia. They're starting to shift away from oil to green energy. Obviously, that's going to take a very, very long time, but still they're starting to do that. And so Saudi Arabia has a ton of leverage, but they don't have as much as they previously did. Yes. Right. And the U.S. also has leverage over Saudi Arabia as well. They have important things. I think Rokana tweeted out that we sell a ton of aviation parts to them. Yeah, weapons. And stuff like that. So almost we need to come to the table and say, hey, listen, you can't do this to us. You can't treat us like this because we'll respond like that. But then again, Saudi Arabia does provide a ton of value to the United States in that region, right? Yeah. Because they have so much geopolitical importance. And if you lose Saudi Arabia as an ally, then all you have in all of the Middle East is Israel. And so it is kind of important for the peace in the Middle East. It is important for energy. Even if they're getting screwed on it, it is still important. So you can't cut them off. I don't think you can't cut them off.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think you can, sure, you can threaten to do all these things, but the idea that we're going to remove U.S. troops and defense systems from Saudi Arabia is pretty ridiculous. That's not going to happen, and it shouldn't happen. Yeah. But again, these things, this shows there's discontent among the political elite and the American people and everyone with Saudi Arabia, right? You remember four-ish years ago, the journalist Khashoggi was killed by Saudi Arabia, an American citizen, by the way.
I mean, well, the United States has, allied with countries historically who have done things like that, right? So that's not really, although it's terrible and it is terrible and awful, but it isn't that's not going to be a deciding factor for U.S. foreign policy in that region. And if it was, it would have been.
But there are calls for it to be a deciding factor, right? When you're this country that says, we export human rights and all these things, and then you let a country get away. I agree from a practical perspective. Saudi Arabia has to keep being an ally, but
Yeah.
these calls aren't going to go away anytime soon.
Yeah.
Right? The relationship is going to deteriorate as people become more aware of these things, and people care more about foreign policy now than they did a couple years ago because of these human rights atrocities that kind of hit people at home, right?
Yeah.
I also want to talk about a couple of other just smaller subjects that we can chit chat about. Something kind of funny that happened is the Belarusian president from Belarus actually banned inflation yesterday. So inflation is done in that country. Belarus is right next to Ukraine and Russia, and Belarus and Putin are very, very, very close.
Wasn't it? He said that no companies can do any price increases anymore, or something like that.
No more price increases from now on in Belarus. He just banned it. Inflation is, I think, at 20 or almost 20%, right? Massive. I wish Biden would have done this sooner.
I mean, he had the insane Inflation Reduction Act. Which is absolutely all about inflation. So
talking about Biden, today he also did something incredible. He pardoned every federally accused U.S. citizen who was accused of simple marijuana possession.
Yeah.
Keep in mind, this is only 6,500 people, but they're all fully pardoned for what they did. And he called for governors and state officials to also review state accusations for this, to pardon individuals who have marijuana possession and have been indicted or are in prison for that. And he also asked to review marijuana as a Schedule 1 drug, which is a huge deal, right? Marijuana not being a Class 1 drug makes sense, first of all. Will help him electorally. Second of all, it's October. This isn't a coincidence.
Yeah, that's true. That it's a very tactical time to make that decision.
Again, another...
Sorry, you go.
Yeah, I was gonna move on, or what were you gonna say?
I was just gonna say, I think a lot of people who maybe aren't as politically... I noticed this a lot with progressives. You have a candidate come in, president. Let's just say Biden. When Biden came in, he had all these campaign promises, and people said, we need Biden to do this, all his campaign promises now, and he can do them now. Yeah. Which is true. He could have done a lot of these things then.
He was seen as the FDR, right? The new.
But that isn't the right mindset to have, right? Because Biden, let's say he has cards and he has cards and he has to play the right cards at the right times. Yeah. And so if he goes out there the first 100 days, I mean, although the first 100 days are the most important, obviously, if he does all his campaign promises then that he can possibly do, right? Obviously, some of them he's not going to be able to do. Then he has nothing really to work with when he goes into midterms, or into 2024. Let's say he runs again. So I think people need to realize that it's not even about patience. It's just about tactics, right? If it's tactical for Biden to do this now rather than to have done this all a year and a half ago, because then we're kind of floating in nothingness, and then Republicans can come out and energize the Republican base, and Democrats don't have much to work with. So I do think it's smart, and I think people need to kind of take a step back and realize that's kind of the thing. But I also think, why does that matter to you? Because you were very excited and passionate about people getting released, and I'm just curious why you care, why.
One, I think it's good, right? Marijuana should not be classified as the same as Quaaludes and heroin, which it is right now. That doesn't make sense. Even cocaine is seen as, quote unquote, less bad than marijuana if you look at it, at the schedules and the classes of drugs. So that's good. I like that. And again, it makes sense. Marijuana is not. It doesn't deserve to be treated as all of these horrible things. It's very. People use marijuana a lot more than before, and more than all of these other drugs, right? People support this as well. The call to remove it from Class 1 and releasing and pardoning these people have only increased in the last years. It's a majority of people support this, and it'll help Biden electorally. I like it. I support it.
Do you support legalization?
Yeah, for sure.
So because it's interesting, because there's a lot of research, and researchers disagree on whether it's a gateway drug or not. And if people don't know what a gateway drug is, very simply, it's just a drug that leads you to consume worse drugs. Obviously, weed's not that bad. It's safe. But the argument is that by doing weed, you can down the line start doing harder drugs that are much, much worse for you. And Do you think that the research is kind of split on this? You can maybe fact check me on this, but from my understanding, nobody really agrees. There's no consensus on whether it is or not.
Yeah.
So do you think, therefore it should maybe be looked at a little bit more, or no? I can give I'll ask you and then I'll give my opinion.
Yeah, I would think Biden actually said this when he campaigned. He said, yes, it should be legal, but we should make sure that it's not a gateway drug. People balked at that, but it is true. As you said, the evidence isn't totally there, right? People kind of immediately say it's not a gateway drug. That's not true yet by evidence. We can't prove that yet. So I would very much support, declassifying it as a class 1 drug, but also investigating the effects of the gateway to other drugs, and then seeing if it should be legal if you're 21 or 26 or 30 or however old you want to be.
Yeah, oh, for sure, definitely. I think that age would definitely be an important thing here. I think, probably this is all me just taking a guess, so don't take what I'm saying here for a fact, but I would assume that, with increased age, you're going to be less likely to allow marijuana to be a gateway drug in your life. But I think, my personal opinion is, even if, it could be characterized as a gateway drug, right? And the research hasn't shown that it's like a gateway drug and it leads you to end up doing heroin, right? There are substances that are just bad for you, right? Like you can smoke cigarettes, which I think is fine. You can drink alcohol, and a lot of people, especially our age, drink alcohol at very unhealthy.
Whoa! Our age. What are you talking about?
Very unhealthy amounts. And marijuana can lead you to unhealthy habits, whatever. But I don't think that that's given we have freedom of action. I think people should be allowed to do marijuana, given it's not bad for you, even if it can lead you down.
And of course, they have to be 21 and older and be in a state where it's legal, right?
Of course, yes, okay. Exactly, yeah.
Second, moving on to one more Biden-esque story. It just came out that there is now enough evidence to prosecute Hunter Biden, who is Biden's son, for tax evasion and gun purchasing crimes, right?
Oh, yeah, that's right. I forgot about that.
This, again, happening exactly a month before the midterms.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see. We saw the story of Hunter Biden's laptop and his dealings in Ukraine back in the day and all these things, and that impacted Biden to a certain extent. We're going to start hearing the name Hunter Biden again and seeing all of those videos and pictures that we like to see with him. So he'll definitely be in the news more.
Yeah. Who exactly is it? I forget. Who I actually have it right here.
Hunter
yeah.
Biden?
Okay. No, I had it here. But it's federal prosecutors who are thinking about it, right? But it's interesting. I think people, people when Trump got raided, they said, oh, this is like tactical timing by the FBI and blah, 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 blah. Like it doesn't actually mean anything. They're just doing it for election, right? But then this comes out, right? So it's maybe Democrats can point to that and say, hey, look,
So it's also,
something happened to us as well.
No,
I don't. Do you think that this matters? Like, do you think that this is going to impact like people's like going in and voting? Because for me personally, there's very little evidence. I think there's like I don't want to. Maybe you can correct me on this, but there's not much evidence of Biden doing anything. I think he like sent one like letter or called somebody once.
Of President Biden, you mean?
Yeah, President Biden.
Yes, but I think the fact that his children, let's say he gets indicted for some crime, it doesn't look good on his character, right? It's his child. Did he not know about that? Like,
I don't
there
know.
Are questions, right? Him being indicted does change the way even I would see.
Do you see
Biden.
him differently?
Huh?
Do you see him differently from that? Because the reason I don't is because like Hunter Biden is just like
he's a wild one.
I'm kind of flushing the formality down the toilet, but I think Hunter Biden is he's just like he is that guy like who is going to do that. Like he does coke, he's with strippers, whatever. He does all these things, but he's like this at the time son of the vice president. His like mom died when he was young. His brother died of brain cancer. Like he is a guy, right, who fits the kind of like what's the word, stereotype almost for somebody who would kind of turn to that kind of life. I don't know, me as a voter, I'm just going to speak out of my personal experience. It doesn't make me not want to vote for Biden or want to vote for him anymore. Like, it doesn't change anything. And I'd say the same thing for Trump. You know, if like Eric Trump or who was it, Donald Trump Jr. I mean, it looked like he was on some substances at the GOP speech, the RNC. It doesn't make me think of Trump differently because of how his kids act. But that's me. I for you, it's different, I guess. Right?
I would think. I think you're different than the average voter. I think voters do see this, and it plays into, you know, the Biden family and the Biden character, right? They're supposed to act a certain way and not, you know, do coke and crimes.
Yeah, I also think Fox News, when they report on it, they definitely make it so that Biden is President Biden is much more involved
yes,
than maybe perhaps he is. So yeah, that also, you know, for Republican voters might energize them.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And 3 more quick things. Another check-in on the Iran protests. We know they started because this 22-year-old woman was in the custody of Iran's morality police and she was killed. There are now massive protests, which are, interestingly, because this is very rare in Iran. They're being led by women primarily. Men are participating, but it's women taking the stand and, you know, calling for a new kind of regime, a new president, new rules or something. So far, somewhere around 85 people have been killed. The president of Iran, unsurprisingly, has blamed everything on U.S. and Israel. It's all them funding these.
Well, they
these
said
women trying to overthrow me.
They said it's a funded coup, which is, you know, although it's not. I don't think. I very much doubt. Yes. You know, that he does have historical precedent not to make a claim like that, but it, you know, maybe to some people they would believe it. Yeah, I will say, I was saying to my dad, J&J, we were the first to report on this. I think
breaking. Yeah,
you know, it was
us, and then I think CNN. Right?
I think that's why it came out that there was it was like 1 or 2 protests that this had happened, and then we talked about it, and then we were like, oh, we wonder. I think you could go back to episode 2, play it back. I think we predicted this whole thing. We did predict. So I'm just gonna throw that out there.
We should get the recognition
we
that we deserve.
We should be nominated. Anderson Cooper, we're coming for you.
After Joe Rogan.
Yeah.
Again, one more Middle Eastern country in Afghanistan. There's this 5-way civil war going on right now, and there was recently an attack against the interior minister of Afghanistan, who is, you know, interior minister of the Taliban government. If you're interested in Afghanistan, you should know his name because he's a very, very important player who's kind of a man behind the curtain. He's dealt with the U.S., China, Russia, Pakistan, kind of everyone. His name is Siraj Haqqani, and someone tried to kill him. It was maybe ISIS. They're saying we don't really know. It was a day ago. It killed over 100 people or injured over 100 people. We still don't know the number specifically. So things in Afghanistan are definitely going to get worse before they know better. And again, you should know this guy's name, Siraj Haqqani. And then one last country, we're going to Brazil, where there were elections a couple days ago. And Lula gained 48% over 43% for the incumbent Bolsonaro. Yeah. This was tighter than expected, actually. They thought Lula was going to get past the 50% threshold.
That's what I thought.
Win outright. And that's not happening. They're going to head to the polls again in a month and vote again. So we'll see what happens with that.
And then I think the one last thing, John Fetterman versus Dr. Oz.
I knew it. We can never go one episode.
No, I was just going to say, I've been noticing actually, we again, the J&J podcast predicted this.
We were first.
He is starting to take a lot of heat for, I think we talked about this last episode or episode 2, but he is really starting to take a lot of heat. People are starting to say, talk about policy. But I don't know if that's because he doesn't talk about policy enough or because what really blows up is his like messaging. We don't have to talk about it too much, but I thought he recently like tweeted out something where he's like, oh, Dr. Oz was at a Penn State game and he had like a glass of wine instead of a beer. And he said, this is how you know he's not a real Pennsylvanian. He's out here drinking wine at a tailgate.
And again, the word of the day for me, semantics again, right? Fetterman he likes his semantics.
Yeah, so he likes his messaging.
We'll see if that works. We have exactly a month, so.
And then, I just think last thing I wanted to do before you sign out was kind of debrief on the Ronan interview. We interviewed, if you guys haven't heard it, we interviewed the treasurer of the NUCR, Northeastern University College Republicans, Ronan, and he was great. He gave his insight onto a variety of topics. If you haven't heard it, I recommend. I kind of wanted, to, if you had any insight on debrief or feelings about it. I know that you were we felt a little frustrated. We felt like we didn't ask him good enough questions or whatever, but it was our first interview. So
I think yes, I'm giving myself some slack here. It was our first interview.
Yeah.
Congrats to Ronan. He was more prepared than both of us combined.
Yeah. He was very prepared with his answers.
We were
Great.
not as prepared. We should work on that more in the future.
Yeah.
But I thought it went well overall. I thought it was interesting to get his perspective on things from, college, his college life to just how he sees politics in general.
Yeah.
Like he's someone who's informed and has kind of different views than people we might be surrounded with and us as well. I hope to keep interviewing these kinds of people and just be more prepared next time.
Yeah, and so I think what I'll do is I'll put a poll on our Instagram story, and I'm gonna ask, because there's two other big clubs at Northeastern. We have the Northeastern Democrats and the Northeastern Democratic Socialists. Mm-hmm. So I'm gonna put that up. If you are listening to this, go ahead and go to our Instagram at Jack and Josh Pod. Hopefully you follow it.
Subscribe,
share
it with your friends,
and just go to that story, and vote. Who do you want to hear us interview first? We obviously want to interview both, but who would you want to hear us interview first? Because we're probably gonna go reach out to them. But yeah, make sure you follow us on all our social media platforms. Jack, do you have anything else to add?
No, that's it. Thank you for listening to the 4th episode. Josh, do you want to do our little outro?
You kind of took it away from me. Thank you so much for listening to our podcast. The continuous support is great. Every episode,
from our billions of viewers,
as we always say. The continuous support is great. Thank you so much, everybody. Next episode, we haven't figured out what we're going to talk about, but we will. I think Jack is looking like he's about to go off and party. Are you partying this weekend, Jack?
Yeah, party hardy.
He's gonna party hardy. All right. Well, thank you so much for listening, and see ya.
Peace.